Welcome to our World of Fiery videos, covering topics of everyday importance to print providers. Today we will cover what is G7 calibration.
So let's turn to a new topic and let's talk for a few minutes about G7. Those of you outside of the US may have only heard a little bit about this, but I need to spend a few minutes on it because the US group here is hearing about this all the time. So let's talk about what G7 is. Many people think G7 is a certification, and it's not. The only certification for G7 is if you are the person doing the G7 calibration. What G7 is it's a methodology for calibrating a press and achieving a common neutral grayscale appearance. This means that one press that is calibrated to G7 will match another press that is calibrated to G7 in the neutrals from the highlight to the midtone. Okay? The important things to remember about G7 are that it's a great method for calibrating presses. If you have conventional presses and you don't know what to do with your plating curves, this is the answer. It's the absolute best answer. One of the reasons for that is that G7 matches the tone curves of that profile in Photoshop called US Web-Coded Swap V2. Remember earlier on the history slide I said that the first ever appearance matching standard in the US was this swap measurements from the 90s. We called that TR001. And TR001 dataset is what was used to make this Adobe profile, US Web-Coded Swap version 2. Guess what? Anytime one of your customers, graphic designer, art director, anybody in the production cycle gets an RGB image and says, oh, I know, I better make that CMYK before I send it over to the print shop, they do it in Photoshop. Under the image menu, they choose mode and they choose they choose CMYK. They save the file and they're done. What many of them don't know is that their Photoshop is set up many, many times, more than 9 out of 10 times in the US, to US Web-Coded Swap. So the value of the G7 calibration process is it makes that color look great on a conventional press that's been G7 calibrated. Okay? It'll match the tonality in terms of lightness to darkness, as well as the gray balance that is expected from that US Web-Coded Swap V2 profile. So that's the super value of it for a conventional press. We calculate G7 curves using either software or this fan paper that I'll show you in a moment. And as I say, it's a very good application of CTP curves. The curves that you put on your plate setter can be used to do this, to make your press match the gray balance and the tonal consistency of the swap data set. Of course, if you do this across many presses, then those presses are going to look like each other, again, just up to the midtone and in the neutrals. So I'll show you just real quickly here. This is the fan paper that we use to calculate G7 manually. Laborious process. Recommend you buy some software if you're doing G7. Those of you that go way back in the industry probably remember using the Jones diagramming technique to link up your scanner with your press, dot gains, and so forth. This is a little bit like that. It's not a Jones diagram, but if you've done that, you'll be very handy with the graph paper here to calculate your G7 curves. Let's talk about G7 with respect to digital. First, let's talk about what G7 is. It's a press calibration method, matches tones and gray balance highlight to midtone, optimizes reproduction of swap separations made with that V2 profile, and there is a qualification for an expert person that does G7 calibrations, but there's no certification you can get for your equipment. So if one of your competitors is telling one of your customers that they're G7 certified and they should print there because they're G7 certified, you should go back and check. Probably the person that did the calibration is G7 certified. You'll find that shop has a seal on the door that says they're G7 master, and it's a qualification program, not a certification program. What isn't G7? G7 is not an appearance matching standard. What does that mean? That means that while G7 will match all my presses from highlight to midtone in the neutrals, it won't match all my presses in the solid saturated colors. Only an appearance matching standard or reference tells me what the color should look like in every different part of the color gamut. A reference is something like ISO V2 from Fogra, like the Grackle profile, or like the modern swap from 2006 or the new ones from 2013. You can always find out if something is really a reference or an appearance matching standard by asking to see an ICC profile for that reference. If there's no profile, as there isn't for G7, then it's not an appearance matching standard. As I said, it's not a certification standard or program, and it's not a press standard.
Thank you for watching. For additional resources and e-learning classes on this topic, visit our website. To see all recorded sessions and register for upcoming World of Fiery webinars, please visit efi.com/WOF webinars.